All right, there we go. Welcome in to State of the Nation, live every Tuesday on twitch.com/Oilers Nation. Here's to hoping that we have the technical side.
Twitch.tv.
Twitch.tv, sorry, twitch.tv/official Oilers Nation is where you can find us. Here's to hoping that the audio issues are all working and we have no problems at all on today's stream. That's been a big goal for us over the last couple weeks as we get this thing going. But I'm Tyler Uremchuk. Nation Dan is here, and our boy Bagged Milk is on the bottom of the screen as well. And guys, the exciting news, the thing that's got everyone buzzing, is it sounds like we're getting hockey.
For me, it was interesting because, Tyler, we were talking about this yesterday on Real Life a little bit. Like, we touched on it towards the end where I was just kind of like, is this going to happen or not?
Yeah.
And then a day later, less than 24 hours later, we're just like, okay, we've got a date, and it just so happens to be Connor's birthday, and it all makes sense, and let's go. I'm excited.
Yeah, apparently it was happening while you guys were talking about it. And then into the night, they were figuring things out. And now, I mean, Wyshynski has kind of backed off it a little bit, saying like for what it's worth kind of thing, that it's not a done deal. But the language that was used there seems like it's pretty well done to me. But
for me, if it's like, so I saw the Wish tweets as well, where he just kind of like, well, you know, let's just say though, it sounds like very, very promising that whether it's the 13th or give or take of a week or so, it doesn't really matter to me. But if we're looking at a 56 game season, we talked about this on Oilers Nation Radio, I mean, extensively over the past few weeks. That's honestly more games in a season than most of us kind of expected. I know, Dan, you kind of threw out maybe hopefully a 60 game, but I know for you were saying that more of a hope and a dream rather of maybe necessarily thinking that was actually going to be where the number was at. So 56 is pretty close.
Yeah, like 60 games was pie in the sky hoping for me, because we had talked about it, that we think that NBC plays a role in this negotiation because of the Olympics, and they have that time slot is just basically socked in with Olympics coverage. So you don't think that the NHL would want to touch that. So maybe there's something where they work that around and have a break in there or something, but who knows? What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I was in the same boat as you. Like, I wanted 60. I was like, 3/4 of a regular year, like that feels nice to me. And when I floated it out to Gregor last week, when I talked to him on the radio, he was kind of like, that's optimistic. And mid-sentence, when I was talking to Frank Saravalli, he cut me off. He's like, nope, not a chance. So I was like, okay, it's going to be like a 42 to 48 game season, and that's what we're going to get. And here we are. It's going to be closer to 60 than 48. So I'm thrilled. I think 56 is a solid number. I mean, we'll get to some predictions maybe later if we have some time. And of course, as always, we want your questions in the chat. I see Brad Stepanko, Nico Jolly, and Luke Graba, which is a good name. I like saying that one. They're all in the chat right now. So what's up?
I think that no matter how many games it actually comes out to, I think the most important part here is that we're not going to lose a season.
Yeah.
And whether it's 60 games or ended up at 48 or 42, the most important thing that the NHL could do was not lose the season when everybody else found a way to play. And just for me, like the NHL, where I was getting frustrated, and I get it, there's business, there's money, all that's tied up. But for me, where I was getting frustrated was the NHL so often loves to talk about growing the game, while they equally seem to love finding new and creative ways to avoid playing hockey. And that was just, it was really frustrating for me as someone, like, we've been through lockouts, we've done all this. So I'm just happy, like, whatever the details are, those will come, but like we're getting close to an actual firm announcement of what a 2021 season is going to look like for the NHL. And I think that's just great news for anybody. First of all, we cover sports for a living, so that is massive for us.
Huge.
Second of all, just in general, in terms of happiness and normalcy, like I can't wait to just be like, oh, it's Tuesday night, I'll throw the Oilers game on.
Yeah.
Especially, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
It's 9 degrees in the city right now, and people are hanging out, but I think we're heading towards those deep freeze numbers again. So I think for us especially, it's just hockey is like our saving grace in the winter. So yeah, Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. Like, it is the saving grace, because we're at the point right now where it's like pitch black outside by like 5:30, and I find myself so many times sitting there and it's like 7 o'clock, and I'm like, well, I might as well like go to bed, because there's like nothing to do. And even if it's not an Oilers game on, like at least when that comes back and the NHL's back, you can at least turn on the TV and have something to watch. And the exciting part about the Canadian division is, one, we're probably going to get a ton, or if not all of these games on national TV. And almost every night there's going to be a matchup that like truly intrigues you, because you're going to be watching two Canadian teams go at it. So that'll be fun. 56 game schedule means you're going to play every team in the Canadian division roughly 8 times, I believe, if that math is correct, and then probably like your rival a couple more times. So we might be getting like 9 Battle of Albertas in the next like 6 months here, which is pretty exciting.
What's going to be interesting, what I'm really looking forward to, like, let's just assume that the report today is true, that it is a 56 game season. What is that schedule going to look like? Because they're going to have to compress a lot of games here. I know that probably they're going to get rid of bye weeks. Okay, no problem. All-Star break's probably going to be gone. Okay, no problem. But still, those are a lot of games to get in and not that much time. So there's going to be a lot of hockey to watch. We're going to get a lot of back-to-backs. There's going to be a lot of 3 games in 4 nights. And we'll see also, I'm like, if it is the all-Canadian division, which it certainly looks like seeing, I'm really excited to see how these series work out and if that's actually the way it's going to go.
Yeah, and I'd love to get people's take on this just quickly in the comments. So if you're listening, if you're watching this right now, we thrive on your feedback. So let us know. But what's your take, Dan?
Well, I was just going to say, and the other thing too, I feel like a broken record and a wet blanket saying this again and again, but the reality is that we're going to have delays and we're going to have cancellations of games because of COVID. Teams are going to have to deal with, having to quarantine segments of players throughout the season. God forbid it's your goalies, like we've seen with the NFL and their quarterback situation. But yeah, just to keep kind of even harp more on what Bagmilk was saying about the schedule, it's going to be interesting to see if they put in some release valves maybe for blocks of schedule where you could slide in new games and new scheduling things, because you don't have to worry necessarily about arenas having scheduling conflicts. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch.
The schedule to me is the fascinating part about this. It's like normally in a given season, you get 3 games a week, maybe 2 sometimes if it's a lighter week, 4 if it's a really heavy, like a back-to-back weekend or something like that. So I'm really interested to see how this schedule turns out, which is going to spawn all kinds of questions in terms of just the Edmonton Oilers. Like we were talking about on ON Radio on Friday, are they going to be allowed to have because of the circumstances, are they going to be allowed to have like a Black Aces squad? And Tyler's like, well, if they do have that, they need to probably keep those guys separated from everyone else just in case something happens. There's going to be, what is that going to look like for the goaltending split?
Yeah.
There's going to be so many interesting questions that come out once this schedule hits the books and once we actually get some finalized details on what this is going to look like. It's exciting.
Where I'm hoping the NHL learns from the mistakes of Major League Baseball and the NFL is you need to build in stretches in your schedule where you can rejig things. And like the NFL, I still think their big mistake at the beginning of the year when they put their head down and said, we're going to just push through COVID. They should have also gone, but we're probably not going to win. So to make life easier, they should have added week 18 so that you had that buffer in the schedule. You could rejig things as you go along. So at the NHL, for me, I'm looking for 2 things. Quick road trips. I don't want teams, you're going to play a lot of games when you go on road trips, but if you're going on a 6-game road trip, it can't be like 18 days. Like I think you want less time in hotels, less time, going through airports and traveling around. I think that's important just in terms of keeping the players safe, keeping the virus out, stopping outbreaks. But I also think it's important to, if you go to Toronto, you should probably play them a back-to-back and then go straight to Ottawa, play them a back-to-back. And even if it's 4 games in 6 nights, I'd rather have them play 4 games in 6 nights on the road and then come straight home and have like 4 days off. So if there is a bit of an outbreak, you contain it quickly and more downtime and more back-to-backs is kind of what I'm saying. I know those are kind of contrasting, but you get my point.
I wonder if it's going to be something like, because I agree with you that if you're going to do the Eastern swing, you better play all the teams more than once. I wonder if we're going to see situations where it's like Oilers fly into Toronto. Mm-hmm. They play the Leafs 3 times over the course of a weekend, say Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. As an example, then they go on to the next city, then home, or if it's going to be more back-to-back sets like you're talking about. Like I'm endlessly fascinated by how they're going to put this together. And
Dangerous Wade said in the chat here, he says you want to see 4-game series over a week, which is interesting. Like, could you just have your Leafs week where you play them Monday, Wednesday at home, and then you go to Toronto and play them Friday, Saturday?
And that's where I would say that you've kind of, if you did it that way, you've factored in a little bit of a release valve of pressure if there is an issue with, say, the Ottawa Senators have an outbreak on their team, and that affects another team that just played Ottawa the week before. It's only going to then affect 2 other teams in that situation. Whereas if you have Ottawa going to Winnipeg, Calgary, and then Edmonton, that's 3 teams right there that then have to shut it down as well because they could have had exposures and they probably have positive tests at that point.
And I'm thinking on the fly here, but if you do it like that, so let's run through the hypothetical of Ottawa is playing Winnipeg, and at the end of their series, it's, hey, these like 4 players now have COVID, so those 2 teams need to go on the shelf for 4 days. And the week after, let's say Winnipeg was supposed to play Edmonton and Ottawa was supposed to play Toronto. It might be easy enough that way if you're doing these week sets, which Danger Suede put in the chat, and I actually really like that idea. If it's a week set, then all of a sudden you just scrap Ottawa and Winnipeg, Edmonton and Toronto play each other. And then later on in the schedule, when you had the Edmonton versus Toronto week, you just swap that to, the original schedule. So I actually think doing it on a week-by-week basis, one, for rivalries, that'll be a ton of fun. Like getting set for a big week against the Flames or the Leafs or someone you're battling for a playoff spot with would be great, and it gives you some interesting flexibility.
Well, it's going to feel like a playoff series, too. It's going to have that intensity of it surrounding it. And another thing, I just lost it. I had something else that like, there's so many fascinating kind of hypotheticals, and we do a really good job, I think, on Oilers Nation Radio, kind of just like going through thought experiments during the pandemic and kind of parsing that stuff out. But it is just, it'll be interesting to see. I remember my idea. The NBA just has had an issue now where an uptick in cases around their teams, and they had like strict protocols that you had to agree to sign on to. And like the Raptors right now are investigating their own players to see if they broke their quarantine rules. But it'll be interesting again to see what the NHL comes up with for, like with the NBA, players weren't allowed to go to clubs, they're not allowed to go to pools, saunas, anything like that. And if they're caught, then there's penalties and suspensions that get handed out. So there's many layers to this. The PA apparently pushed back on the money, but maybe they gave up more in the way of control for their season.
Well, I wonder, that's a great point, Dan, because I was thinking about it as you were talking and I don't think it got nearly as messy as the MLB players owner situation did. The other day I was feeling a little bit bummed about. I was talking with Coombsy. Shout out to Coombsy, and we were just kind of chatting back and forth. And I was kind of starting to get bummed out about the idea of whether or not there's going to be a season this year. So what I did was I went back and I read through 2 or 3 weeks worth of MLBPA kind of bitching and moaning from the summer and being like, oh, okay, this isn't actually so bad. But my point here is, with that kind of out of the way, or at least a big chunk of it reportedly out of the way, I wonder what, to Dan's point, the league and the PA are telling the players, like, there's a lot of pressure on you guys to make this work. There's 700 guys in the NHL, roughly, give or take. That's 700 people that need to make sure that they are on the same page with making sure that this season's a success, because they're all losing money already. They're going to do this probably under a circumstance where Tyler, you talked about it a bunch of times. Maybe some of the owners didn't even want to go forward at all. So to me, there's a lot of pressure on the players to make sure that this goes through smoothly.
Absolutely. I think there is. And the players, to an extent, I think are going to have to kind of police themselves. Like, you've heard stories from, Major League Baseball camps and all that, which were trying to get going back when COVID first hit. And it was, that was kind of what they were told, is like, hey, you need to police yourselves. And some organizations took it very seriously. And some clubhouses had leaders who were stepping up and going, if one of you fucks up, it screws over all of us. And there were other clubhouses where the leaders just kind of said, do your thing, don't get caught, and we're fine. And so it is going to be like, teams are going to have to figure this out themselves, and it's on the players to an extent.
Well, and it comes back to the return to play for the playoffs there. We've heard the stories that like Oscar Klefbom didn't want to come back, but was, kind of shoehorned into it. Mm-hmm. You got to think that it's going to come down to the leadership of each team, right? And the teams that have those, the old guard captains, the Zdeno Charas, the Giordanos kind of mentality where it's, it's just, let's show up and do our work. And then you've got guys like Connor and Sidney Crosby where it's like, watch what I can do and come play with me kind of thing. It's going to be fascinating to watch the compliance of each team and when the COVID does, get traced back, where the story kind of came from for each of the teams.
I thought it was going to be, you know what? I started feeling better about everything the other day when I saw it. Like, I know this means nothing to anything. Well, it might have, but when the videos came out that Connor was back in the city, it just made me feel better. like, okay, well, he wouldn't be flying back to Edmonton if there maybe wasn't something going on, at least some progress, some positive progress. So I know there's a bunch of players, like Leon's been here for a while and he's been practicing with, as far as I'm concerned, still Edmonton Oilers, Sam Gagner. But like, it just, I don't know about, did it make you guys feel any better just to see some of the boys back in town?
Absolutely. I think even just knowing that like Draisaitl and that group were skating a few weeks ago, it's like, they're clearly confident that there's going to be a season, right? And Connor coming back from Arizona as well shows me that he's shifting from, sort of that off-season mode where he's down in Arizona skating with Matthews, doing those camps, and he's flipping the switch into it's almost season time here, and he's going to be in Edmonton skating with his teammates. I'd imagine he has to do I know he had COVID, but he still has to do the 14-day quarantine and all that, I'm sure, coming up from the States. So, I mean, Connor's clearly getting ready for in 2 weeks to be taken to the ice with his teammates as well. So it's exciting. I saw the Flames, as much as I'm not excited about the Flames, they had a bunch of their European players start to hop back over. So I wonder if we're going to see that coming through in the next few weeks as well. Like, which players are Edmonton going to recall back over? Like, is Nygaard going to come back in the next couple of weeks? Is Haas going to come back in the next couple of weeks as well? So yeah, I think the more players that come over, like, it's just going to be that build up, and eventually there's going to be that tsunami wave of excitement for the season.
You kind of brought up an interesting question that I hadn't really thought too much about. You would imagine, and I'm just thinking out loud here, you would imagine that camps are going to be compressed. We're probably going to get 1 or 2 preseason games, which to me is the best because fuck the preseason in general.
Actually, Dreger said no preseason games, I think.
Oh, perfect.
Beauty.
So my point here is that's going to be really interesting to see which players they even bring back from Europe for camp anyway. Does Evan Bouchard come back? Do they have a spot for him right now, or do they just think, hey, he's playing well in the Allsvenskan, and they should just leave him there for the time being? You know what I mean?
Well, and I think it's a good point, and I think that the reason, like, a real advantage to this move by Ken Holland is that that the players that are over there are being watched by Oilers scouts and being watched by Oilers staff. And so it's basically been an extended training camp for some of these players. Guys, the games range, just off the top of my head from the prospect up to the games played, ranges from like 22 games down to like 8. But that's enough to be able to see, what you've got in that player at this current moment. And maybe for some of them, the decision is to just stay over in Europe, keep competing at that level. And then for some of the players too, the hand is forced, right? Like Broberg being in the SHL means that he's in the SHL until the SHL regular season is over. So yeah, it's going to be fun to watch.
Like, I wonder, maybe for my example, Bouchard wasn't the best example because he's actually got a legitimate chance of playing for the Oilers this year.
He's their 4th best right shot D-man.
Like, what about Ryan McLeod? He's not making the Oilers this year. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there even any point in him coming back from Europe, or they just say, listen, bro, you're doing fine over there. Just ride it out.
I think that the only reason that they call somebody back is because they feel like they're ready to push the lineup, to make the lineup, or they have the Black Aces squad like Tyler talked about.
Yeah, the Black Aces squad as well. Like, I would almost rather, instead of bringing back guys like Lavoie and McLeod and being like, hey, you guys are going to be on our Black Aces squad, just give Riley Sheahan a contract, right? Go revisit some of those guys. Go find an 8th defenseman somewhere who's just looking for a place to play and be like, hey, man, you want a paycheck? Come to Edmonton. Be on our Black Aces squad. You might get into a few games kind of thing. I'd rather see that than like bringing back over the young guys, especially when you see the success they're having over in Europe. I think it's been really good for a lot of those guys to get into game action and all of that, and not just be, sitting around skating at some practice facility with nobody in their hometown. So that's been good. It will be interesting to see who they bring back, though. Because
the reality is they're playing good hockey over there, too. Like, yes, Lavoie is having a great season in the Allsvenskan. That's better for him than just practicing and fucking firing pucks at a shooter tutor or whoever the Black Ace goalie is. Like, that doesn't do really anything for him.
Yeah, nothing against shooter tutors either, but I agree. Like, actual games are very good for him.
Well, and that's why I made a kind of a joke headline, but talking about Adam Cracknell and guys like that, where we've signed these veterans that, yes, they don't really belong on the Edmonton Oilers at this point. And, a McLeod probably does deserve that spot more so, but you want McLeod playing consistent games. And if the AHL isn't able to figure it out, which it sounds more and more so like the Canadian AHL teams are not going to be able to play up in Canada, you're setting yourself up for failure there if you've got a guy on your AHL team that you have, a need for on your NHL team. So I don't know. You probably see a guy like Adam Cracknell end up in our Black Aces squad just because he's NHL ready kind of thing.
Which is good. Like that's kind of what Adam Cracknell was signed to do, right? Either he's going to be that good veteran down in the American League, or in this instance, it sucks that you got to sit in the press box probably for most of the season, but it's a paycheck, man, and that's kind of what you were signed to do. Just looking through the chat right now, some talk about the mouse issue at Wanye's house. If you haven't gone back, if you haven't listened to Real Life, go listen to Real Life, because the first 30 minutes of that is dedicated to what's going on at Wanye Manor. And I think he'll get it under control eventually, but I love that the chat's talking about it, because that was one of the funniest things we've done in a while.
Yeah, he's overrun. If you didn't hear, Wanye is overrun with mice. Go download yesterday's Real Life. It's hilarious to hear him describe the situation at Wanye Manor and his approach to trying to solve it. Despite Chris Chalmers giving him some advice from a construction perspective on what he needed to do, he didn't really seem to want to hear it, and that made it all the more hilarious to me. I want to read this, since we're excited, and I completely get why we're excited. I just want to read this tweet by Pierre LeBrun that came out a few hours ago, because it also just kind of maybe put some cold water on it a little bit, just in the sense that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. He's like, I want hockey to be back as bad as anyone else, but let me reiterate, the COVID situation could still derail things. That's the part nobody at the NHL or PA are taking for granted. If not derail, then perhaps further delay. So yes, let's plan for January 13th, but, and I think he's right. I mean, I wrote about it in my Random Thoughts article that goes up on the weekends on OilersNation.com about, yeah, the NBA is set to kick off here in a couple weeks, maybe
January 22nd.
You know what I mean?
Or sorry, yep. December 22nd.
Yeah, December 22nd.
So there's still a lot of things that could delay stuff. So that's why I think that the onus on the players to make sure that they're maintaining safety protocols and doing what they can to get the season going is going to be I think there's so much pressure on them to do that. And I think that goes the same with the NBA guys that are going to get started right away, but it's going to be really interested to see, because we're going to have the premier is going to be talking about plans for Alberta starting in 3 hours here, 2.5 hours. And who knows what's even going to happen after that update, right? So I'm excited, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and I hate that.
It could be at the point where if the Oilers want to have camp here in the city, and I would imagine they'd be using Terwilliger or whatever, because they can't use their own facilities because the World Juniors are there. They're going to need some sort of exemption from the province, similar to what the World Juniors did, similar to what the AJHL had for a little bit there. You're going to need the exemption just to even have your players skating on the ice at the same time. So from that perspective, if the province is going to give them that exemption potentially, it might be a point where they need to, promise that the players are going to be tested every day and that the players aren't going out into the public and all of that. It might have to be a weird sort of hybrid bubble for training camp for the time being.
Yeah, where they're it wouldn't be surprising to me that when all the boys are in town and they've quarantined and they've tested, blah, 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 that we see it just, I'm just spitballing here. We see an announcement, the Oilers make their way to Saskatoon to hold camp there, because like you said, the World Juniors are in town and there's a bunch of players from all over the world playing at the arena. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how this goes.
And it's also something that obviously is an answer or a question for somebody that signed an NHL contract recently and not us, but I would be curious to know what level of control the NHL teams have over the players when it comes to their off ice activities. I know in the NBA, there's certain players that aren't allowed to drive vehicles that can go too fast kind of thing. They agree to a lot of control and, maintenance by the NBA teams that you don't necessarily hear about with the NHL. I'd be curious to know what kind of level of control players have given up over the years. Maybe it's talking to an agent, but who knows?
It took me 24 minutes to notice this, but I just realized I left the menu on the right side of the Zoom call is up, so everyone could see our names there and see the little camera button and all of that. I just realized that, so there you go. There's our technical hiccup for the day.
We're still learning. We're still learning.
I don't know how to
2022.
I don't know how to get it. Oh, close. Fixed it.
But you know who I'm feeling best for?
Who?
Obviously, we're excited, but I'm thinking of fans of teams like Detroit. You know what I mean? By the time this gets back on the ice in January, they'll have gone about 10 months without any hockey whatsoever.
Brutal.
That is insane to think about.
Ottawa.
10 months between regular season games. And I don't know, there's talk that those guys might get a bit of a longer training camp or something like that. But like,
how do they get, like, is that a day?
Yeah, I don't know. Or do they maybe get exhibition games? Do you give them exhibition games, or is that too much of like a unfair advantage to give some teams because they haven't played in 10 months? I don't know.
So Elliot Friedman posted something on Sportsnet, and he's admittedly he's speculating based on stuff that he's heard, but there's nothing concrete here. He says so non-playoff teams were initially able to report on December 28th, while the others remaining go on January 1st. So that's 3 days, I guess, but
that'll do it.
Whatever. And it also looks like they're working on potential short-term hubs if they need to at least get this started. So that would also be interesting to see how that would work. Like you would fly into, say Toronto for 10 days, play a bunch of games, and then you bounce for 10 days. Like, I don't know.
Full minor hockey mode. I want the Oilers to like play the Sens at 10 a.m. and then also play at 8 p.m. against the Habs. Just double dip it.
Or maybe the dreaded minor hockey tournament back to back. You ever get into those?
Oh yeah, when you go to some random small town for a tournament and it's like, boys, we got like 20 minutes until our next game starts.
Yep.
Well, and it's like too. I could definitely see them doing, especially with Manitoba and Alberta issues. Maybe like a Saskatoon, Winnipeg, hub, Calgary, Edmonton summit, where it's just you go through a series playing in that bubble kind of thing. Like I don't know. There is some logistics and stuff that they have to deal with, and Alberta is a hotbed for COVID right now.
I have
we're the fucking Florida of Canada right now.
We are.
Let's be honest.
I have a great minor hockey tournament story. I think I was in Bantam, and we had back-to-back games in this tournament. I think it was in Saskatchewan. And since it was just like a tournament and it was kind of just for fun, we were dressing our backup goalie would play as a skater. So we had back-to-back games, and in the first period of the first game, our goalie blockered someone in the face. So he's automatically kicked out. And so we had to like kill time while our other goalie went to the room, took off his player gear, put on his goalie gear, and came out to play in net. And then we played the very next game. So it was a back-to-back. But our other goalie, we didn't know what he could do because they were waiting to see if he should be suspended for it or not. So the decision, and I kid you not, the decision they came up with is that he was suspended as a goalie, but he could play skater.
That's sweet. It
made no sense.
Well, I'm looking forward to just along those lines, just because I think we're in for some weirdness here in terms of like, I'm just thinking about in baseball. Remember when what's his name had to get pulled out in the 6th inning?
Yeah,
in the World Series?
Game 6 of the World Series.
Like I'm seeing situations where all of a sudden the Oilers are playing, I don't know, like the Flames or something, and all of a sudden Matt Tkachuk gets pulled out mid-game, and everybody's like, "Wait a minute, what's going on right now?" So I think there's going to be weirdness and oddness in all of this, and I cannot wait to see how the players and the league navigate it, because this is just all so bizarre, and they've got. With all due respect to both of them, like I actually want to give props to both of them because they're trying to find a way to figure this out and actually get back on the ice. But man, that is an insane job that they have to deal with. And I'm glad that I don't have to do anything with it. I just get to sit back and talk about it.
Couple minutes left here in State of the Nation this week. So there's one other topic I wanted to touch on. Avery in the chat briefly brought up the AHL situation is a hell of a mess if you can't call anyone up if they can't play in Canada. And where I want to go with that is like, are we going to get a year here where there's no trades? Or like the one Low Tide keeps saying, if the Oilers have a goaltending problem, they'll solve it during the year. And I keep thinking like Arizona's going to, with the Black Aces squad, maybe not, but like if a goalie goes on waivers or if you want to make a trade, do you have to bring someone in and then have them quarantine for 2 weeks? Or are they going to have like special exemption where like if they can produce negative tests on like 3 straight days, they can join your team or something like that?
I don't know. Well, it's super interesting.
I think the thing that plays the most for me is this 2-day testing that they've been working on now. I think that the NHL has to go about accessing some of that rapid testing software or whatever the infrastructure is, because you can't have the Oilers making a transaction for a goalie and maybe they swapped out one of their goalies in that deal. Yeah. All of a sudden they have one goalie. Like it's just you either have to look at transactions as a whole being different, or you got to have a plan in place for moves.
The NHL will acquire a finite amount of vaccines, and the only way you get one is if you are traded cross-country. And if you're traded, you get the vaccine, and that way you're allowed to play. I'm kidding, because that's not how vaccines work.
Exactly. The doses, you have to do 2 doses 2 weeks apart, so it's like even worse.
Just having some fun there. All right,
I like the scenario, just before we wrap. Matt Henderson came up with it, that since the elderly are getting vaccinated first, wouldn't it be great if Rogers Place was just full of a bunch of 80-year-olds and they're just enjoying some games?
Why not?
I'd like to see it.
Oh, I wish my grandpa was around to be able to see that. He'd love that. He'd be just roaring, laughing, and yelling at the players.
Yeah, none of the young riffraff would be at the bar, and they would just be able to be nice and quiet in there.
Players are getting yelled at to quiet down.
Instead of beers, they'll have A&W coffees on tap. And just have those ready to go, and then 99-cent refills or whatever like that, and old people will love it. It'll just be the lower bowl is all old people, and this is actually an idea that would be great. The upper bowl, just all frontline workers who also have the vaccine, and there you go. That'll be the Oilers crowd.
If anybody deserves to go to a hockey game, chill as frontline workers. But I love the idea of a bunch of old people at Rogers Place, but then they're lobbying for the games to start at 6 a.m. instead of 7:30 p.m.
These 5 o'clock starts are too dang late.
I love this.
All right. Okay, we are going to wrap this up here. If you didn't listen to Real Life yesterday, I would implore you to download that because it was hilarious. We're going to have another episode coming up on Thursday, so the latest on the Mouse situation at Wanye Manor will come then. And then Friday, we're going to have more on the NHL return to play with a new episode of Oilers Nation Radio, which is always a ton of fun.
3 days from now, who knows what the fuck could happen between now and Friday.
We will have a lot to talk about, and we haven't been able to say that very often. So I hope you enjoyed State of the Nation. If you did, tell a friend about it. Thanks to everyone who was nice and active in the chat as well. That makes us a lot more fun as well. That's going to wrap this one up. We'll see you around. Talk to you next Tuesday, Oilers Nation.